So this evening we are going to look at making a chocolate fudge cake. The sponge for this recipe is a little bit unusual in that it uses oil instead of butter or margarine, and it also has whisked egg whites in it, so it's a really nice sponge. It's really light and always really moist, and it's a really good reliable one. It's great for things like birthday cakes and things like that as well. And then I'm going to look at the fudge icing to go on it as well. So to start off, I've already preheated my oven to 180 degrees. And I've prepared my sandwich tins, so I have a sheet of greaseproof paper in the bottom of them, and I've already greased the sides with a little bit of margarine as well. So we're going to use 125 grams of plain flour, and as you can see I'm being a little bit lazy here, so I have my bowl already on my scales with my sieve on top of it, and I've just made sure that my scales is at 0 before starting to weigh. So I'm going to pop my flour in here. So it's 125 grams of plain flour. If you have self-raising flour, you can use it as well, just don't add the baking powder that I'm going to add now in a second. So 125 grams of plain flour. We're going to use cocoa powder to give this mixture the chocolatey flavour. So it is 25 grams of cocoa powder. So I'm just going to, again, zero my scales. Just add this quite slowly so that you don't add too much because you won't be able to take it out. And the reason we sieve all these together is to make sure that it's really well mixed through the whole cake. And particularly cocoa powder, it's really important to sieve cocoa powder because it tends to be quite lumpy in the container as well, so just to make sure you get rid of all the lumps. And then we are going to add some baking powder as well. So it is 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder. I have these handy little measuring spoons. If you don't have them, it's the smallest little spoon that you'd use for making a cup of tea. If you are using measuring spoons, we're always making sure that it's a level teaspoonful for the measuring spoons, and it is 2 of them. So once you have all your dry ingredients in the sieve there, you can sieve them through, and then the last thing you need to add to that is your sugar. I am putting this into a bowl that I know is big enough to accommodate the whole mixture, so eventually all of the components are going to end up in the bowl with the dry ingredients. Okay, so as I said, the last dry ingredient to go in here is our sugar. I'm using brown sugar, so it's 125 grams of brown sugar. If you don't have brown sugar, it does work with white sugar as well, it's just not as dark a colour. So that's going in with our dry ingredients as well. I'm going to give that just a gentle stir through so that it's all mixed, so that my flour, my cocoa powder, my baking powder and my sugar in that bowl. And I'm going to set that aside, and then we're going to start preparing our wet ingredients. So this recipe calls for 2 large eggs separated. So the egg yolks, which I'm going to pop into this measuring jug here, are going to be mixed with the milk and the oil. And then I have the mixing bowl off of my stand mixer here. I'm going to use that to whisk my egg whites. Before popping egg whites into a mixing bowl, it's a good idea to scald it out with boiling water and just dry it out, and that just makes sure that there's no remaining grease on it from any previous mixtures that might have been in it. Because obviously if there's any grease in it, our egg whites won't whisk properly. And then I have a cup here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack my egg in half over the cup. I'm going to use the cup to collect the egg white, and then I'm going to pop the egg yolk into the jug. So I'm just going to toss it between each shell. You can also get egg separator little gadgets as well. We just want to make sure we don't pierce our egg yolk. So once you've drained off all of the egg white, our egg yolk can go into our jug, and we're going to pop our egg white into our mixing bowl. And it's really important to do 1 egg at a time, just in case your yolk pierces. It means that you haven't destroyed the whole mixture. Okay, to my egg yolks that I have here, I'm going to add my oil and my milk. So I'm going to use rapeseed oil. You can use corn oil as well. Any kind of oil that doesn't have a very strong flavour, so I wouldn't advise anything like olive oil or something like that. So it is, let me double check, it is 6 tablespoons of corn oil, or rapeseed oil. So it is 5 tablespoons of milk. 1. Okay, so once you have your 3 components ready to go, we want to make sure that we have everything ready so that we can get the whole mix into the oven as quick as possible. Because once we add any liquid to our dry ingredients here, it'll activate our baking powder, so it'll start to rise from then. So we want it in the oven as quick as possible. So I'm going to start off first with a whisk, and I'm going to slowly add this, my egg, my oil, and then my milk mixture. So I'm making a little bit of a well in the centre, and I'm going to gradually mix this in to form quite a stiff kind of a batter almost. It is quite a stiff mixture, so make sure you get all the sides mixed in and no flour left at the bottom either. Now we are going to fold in our egg whites, and this is really where our cake mixture becomes lovely and light and fluffy. So we're going to use a spoon to fold in, metal spoon. I'm just going to scrape my whisk down here. We try not to waste any of our mixture. So because it's such a stiff kind of a batter, we're only going to add 1 spoonful of egg whites initially and just stir them through. We're not going to fold them in, just to lighten the mixture a little bit. And then it'll make it easier to fold the rest in. So I'm just kind of stirring the first spoonful through to make the mixture a little bit softer. And once we have that added, from then on we are going to fold. So it's the kind of cut through and fold over process. So you can add your egg whites in about 2 or 3 additions. We've whisked them to really stiff peaks to try and get as much air in as possible. So we're folding over the egg whites and cutting through. So I have my egg whites all mixed through, so it's a really soft mixture, you can see there. I am going to use a spatula just to make sure that there isn't any bits of chocolate kind of trapped at the bottom, so that we have it completely mixed the whole way through. And it'll be helpful then to scrape down the sides as well, just to get it all into our tins. So just to make sure it's all evenly distributed. And then I'm going to divide it into my 2 tins, so half into each tin. And this is, I suppose, the handy bit about this bowl is being able to pour, because it is such a soft mixture. So once we have cleaned out our bowl with our spatula really well, you can see because it's such a soft mixture, it flattens itself out, so it's ready to go straight into the oven. And you can see here we have some bubbles forming already, so that's our baking powder activating, so we want to get it into the oven as quickly as possible. So my oven is preheated now at 180 degrees, so they're going to go in for about 20 to 30 minutes until they've gone kind of slightly golden brown around the edges. It's hard to tell with the chocolate. And that we can press a finger on top of it and it doesn't leave a dent, so it springs back. So I've just taken my cakes out of the oven, and I know they are ready, firstly because when I press on it, it doesn't leave a fingerprint, so it's springing back. And secondly, along the edge, now it's quite hard to tell just because it's a brown tin, but all around the edges the cake has actually shrunk away from the tin, so it's going to lift out really easily as well, so I think that's another sign that it's baked as well. So I've left the cakes to sit in the tins just for a minute or two. Then I'm going to flip them out of the tins onto cooling racks, and just to make sure that you lift the greaseproof paper off the underside of the cake as well. And it should come off nice and easily. And then we're going to leave them to cool completely before we add the fudge icing to them, because we don't want to melt the icing when we add it. So to make our fudge icing, we're actually going to do it in a pot. So we're going to melt our sugar into our evaporated milk, and then we're going to add chocolate and butter or margarine. I'm going to use margarine today. So to start off, it's 75 grams of just normal sugar. And to that we're going to add evaporated milk. Evaporated milk comes in a tin. The standard size that you get actually has enough to do 3 portions of fudge icing. So we need 75 mils of evaporated milk. Now, the milk I have here, I've actually frozen. So I made this cake previously, and this is the leftover evaporated milk from it. Now you'll notice sometimes when you freeze it, it kind of separates. And as you start to thaw it, it kind of looks like it's not going to work, but it does. It all comes together and it tastes just as good. So I'm going to add my evaporated milk into my sugar here. And then I'm going to pop it on the heat. So it's kind of an unusual one. We pop it on a low heat until the sugar has completely dissolved, so until you can't see any granules of sugar anymore. And then we turn it up to kind of a medium heat. We allow it to simmer for 6 minutes, but during that 6 minutes we don't stir it. So you're stirring initially when we are melting in our sugar and evaporated milk, and then you stop stirring for 6 minutes and just let it simmer gently. So I'm just going to leave that on a low heat until it all dissolves, and then we will start to simmer it. So I'm still just dissolving the sugar into this here. I haven't brought it quite up to a simmer yet. You can almost kind of hear that kind of graininess of the sugar, so that should completely disappear. And you can kind of see it slightly there as well. So all of the sugar has dissolved into the mixture now. You can see it's a much runnier consistency, and there's no kind of granules left in it. So I'm going to turn the heat up a little bit just to bring it to a simmer. You might kind of have to bring it up and down a little bit depending on how sensitive your cooker is. And once it starts to simmer, we're going to time 6 minutes and then switch it off and start adding our chocolate and our butter. Now, so there's 5 minutes left on my timer here, and you can see it's really kind of bubbling up there. So I'm going to turn it down a little bit, and usually you need to kind of keep a close eye to it. You just want it to gently simmer for the 6 minutes. Okay, so I'm just into the last minute here of my evaporated milk and sugar mixture, just simmering gently. So you can see there it's not bubbling up through the pot anymore. I've turned it quite low at this stage, just to allow it to simmer. Once that has finished, I'm going to firstly add my chocolate. So it is 100 grams, sorry, there's my timer. It's 100 grams of dark chocolate, unsweetened if you can get it. Broken into pieces, because we're relying on the heat that is now in this mixture to melt it. So I've turned my ring off altogether there. I'm going to add in my chocolate. And once that has all melted, so I tend to just leave it to sit in the mixture for a minute or two, just to let the heat get into it and let it start melting. Once that has all mixed through, it'll make a lovely kind of fudgy kind of consistency. We're going to add just 40 grams of either butter or margarine, and it just kind of gives it a glossy finish. So I reckon my chocolate's probably starting to melt there now, so you can see it'll slowly combine through the mixture. So just keep stirring until your chocolate is completely melted. Okay, so I have no more lumps of chocolate left there now. So the next thing I'm going to add is I'm using margarine here. And again, I have it cut into small little pieces just to help it melt, because we're relying on the heat in the mixture to melt it. So again, just kind of get it down into the mixture and let it start melting. Okay, so my fudge icing is ready. You can see it's quite a soft mixture at the moment. So I'm going to transfer it into a bowl and then pop it in the fridge to cool before trying to decorate my cake with it. And then I can sandwich the two when everything is completely cool. Now, so at this stage my cakes have cooled down completely. My icing has had time to cool down as well, and you'll notice it's a much thicker kind of fudgy consistency, but it's still really easy to work with when it comes to decorating a cake and putting it together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just put a tiny blob of icing on my plate just to hold my bottom tier in place. And I'm going to choose the kind of slightly flatter of the two to be my bottom tier. And then I'm going to put just enough icing to sandwich the two layers together in between. I'm using a cake decorating palette knife. If you use the back of a butter knife, it works just as well. So I'm just going to spin this around and make sure it's evenly spread out right out to the edges. And you can see it's really easy to work with. So once we have that all the way around, I'm going to pop my second tier on. And at this stage I am going to put a nice big blob of icing in the middle. Not the whole thing, just so we can have a little bit to work around the edges with as well. And I'm going to Gently spread this out all the way to the edges and let it just work its way down the sides as well. So once I have the complete top coated, then I'm going to use my remaining icing just a little bit at a time on my palette knife and just work it around the edges, being as tidy as you can be.